Nobody in the history of the Gospel Music Hall of Fame has ever been inducted 3 separate times. Russ Taff has 6 Grammys, 16 Dove Awards, and a voice Billboard Magazine called the single most electrifying in Christian music. And the entire time he stood on those stages collecting those trophies, singing about freedom and grace to arenas full of people who felt something genuine coming off that voice. He was carrying a secret so heavy it nearly destroyed him, using the same method his father had used before him to survive the same shame, hiding in the same way, inside the same silence the gospel he was singing about was supposed to break. This is that story, and it covers the part gospel music spent a long time pretending wasn't there. The story begins November 11th, 1953, in Farmersville, California, deep in the San Joaquin Valley, where Russell Taff was born, the 4th of 5 sons to Joe and Ann Taff. 2 forces shaped that household from the beginning: music and faith, both enormous, both tangled in complications no child should carry alone. Joe Taff preached at Eastside Tabernacle Church. About 20 people gathered in a converted laundromat, a man of genuine belief who preached a theology built on perfection and condemnation, on a God who demanded more than any human being could actually deliver. Joe Taff himself could not live up to it, because Joe Taff was also an alcoholic. Ann Taff worked the fields, picking fruit and chopping cotton, and she kept a collection of gospel records in the house that became young Russ's entire musical universe. No secular music, no newspapers, no television. Mahalia Jackson, the 5 Blind Boys of Alabama, the Blackwood Brothers, and the Statesman Quartet, especially Jake Hess, a singer Russ loved the way other kids loved the Beatles or Elvis, practicing stage moves in front of his bedroom mirror because those gospel men were the only stars his world allowed. Ann stood her son on the church altar for his first solo when Russ was 4 years old, and something stopped the room. By 11, he played guitar, and gospel music didn't choose Russ Taff. That voice chose him. Russ was 7 when he walked in and found his father drunk for the first time, a moment he's returned to in interviews across many years because it marked something permanent. That same year, the congregation removed the family over Joe Taff's drinking. The worst came when Russ was 13, and the church voted his father out as pastor, after which his own uncle tracked Russ down to deliver a message personally. "Russ, you're not welcome here because you're his son," a 13-year-old boy, guilty of nothing. And the church's answer was to send the son away alongside the father. His words about it have never softened. "I was 13 years old when we were asked to leave the church, and these were the only people that I knew, and they walked away from us." Inside the family, Russ absorbed the role that falls to the most sensitive child, the peacemaker, who stays when everyone else checks out. His brothers found ways to emotionally exit the situation. Russ held on and tried to hold everything together while his mother leaned on him in ways no child should carry, using him as leverage in the conflict with her husband, which made Joe Taff jealous of the closeness between his wife and his son. That boy, dragging unprocessed rejection and shame and grief that nobody around him had language for, was the same boy whose voice stopped rooms. Around 15, the family relocated to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and that's where Russ finally found solid musical ground. He stayed behind when the family moved back to California, and at 16 co-founded a band called Sounds of Joy with musician James Holohan Jr. That band landed an opening slot for the Imperials, one of the defining acts in mid-70s gospel music. 2 weeks before his 23rd birthday in 1976, Russ traveled to Nashville and auditioned, and that same evening they hired him. That same year he married Tori, the woman who would remain beside him through every trophy and every collapse for decades to come. From 1976 to 1981, with Russ driving the vocals, the Imperials became the best-selling contemporary Christian music group in the country, earning 3 Grammys and 5 Dove Awards together. The financial arrangement beneath that success reflected none of it. A flat salary with no share of ticket or album revenue. And that was one central reason he departed in 1981 for a solo career. Walls of Glass earned a Grammy in 1983. Medals in 1985 became the best-selling album by any male CCM artist that year, and by 1998 the total had reached 6 Grammys and 16 Dove Awards across a career spanning rock, pop, blues, southern gospel, black gospel, country, and big band. 3 separate Gospel Music Hall of Fame inductions followed, as an Imperial, as a Gaither vocal band member, and as a solo artist, and no one else in that hall's history has ever received 3. Somewhere inside all of it, during one of those years of stages and trophies, Russ Taff reached into a refrigerator in a New York City apartment on a hot July afternoon and took his first drink. He was 26. Tori was out shopping, and everything he'd been running from his entire life went quiet. That first drink was never about pleasure or rebellion against his faith. His father's theology of condemnation had installed a set of internal voices that ran constantly, present on every stage he ever stood on, there through every Grammy speech, every Gaither concert, every performance where thousands of people felt something real and electric coming off that voice. His own account is exact. I hated the taste of it, but I finished it. Within 5, 6, 7 minutes, those voices got quieter. The most celebrated voice in Christian music had spent his adult life carrying condemnation loud enough that a beer he didn't even enjoy was worth finishing because, for a few minutes, it gave him peace. The years that followed brought self-hatred and self-loathing, his own words, while he kept standing on stages singing about freedom and feeling like the biggest hypocrite in the world. A sobriety stretch from 1988 through 1997 held, but his father's death broke it, and 3 rehab stints came and went without it sticking, because childhood trauma, shame, and a theology of condemnation wired in before he was old enough to question it, none of that responds to simply drying out. Tori put it plainly from inside the marriage. He was dark, sad, and angry, and what she didn't recognize at first was that he was regularly pouring a depressant into his system while already carrying a clinical depression diagnosis, driving himself deeper in ways willpower alone could never reverse. Tori eventually located a residential trauma treatment center, and that's where things finally shifted. Somewhere between 63 and 65 days at that facility, at the cost of most of their savings, Russ Taff began to actually get well. Not just sober, but genuinely well for the first time in his adult life. The rage toward his father had been replaced by something he didn't expect. When I left there, he said, "I feel sympathy. I think I could talk to them now." As of February 2025, Russ Taff had been 18 years sober. "We Will Stand," the anthem that held the #1 spot on Christian radio for 15 straight weeks, recorded by Shirley Caesar, by Milton Brunson and the Thompson Community Singers, by the Mighty Clouds of Joy, declared that the church should be one regardless of background, and the man who sang it couldn't find within that same church a safe place to say he was drowning. Russ has offered the same answer consistently across years of interviews. The problem was religiosity, which he distinguishes sharply from living faith. Institutional religion that demands performance, punishes vulnerability, and builds its public face around victory testimonies with no room for wounded people to actually find healing. His words leave no space for softening. I hate religiosity. I just hate it because it robs people of a spiritual experience. The industry celebrated him. What it never offered was a safe place to fall. October 30th, 2018. Russ Taff. I Still Believe opened in over 700 theaters through Fathom Events. Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, Bart Millard of Mercy Me, Mark Lowry, and Bill Gaither all sat for interviews, and so did Tori Taff, speaking honestly about what those years cost her and about her own path through Al-Anon. Nothing in that documentary was softened or packaged. Arriving drunk to a major Christian television taping, clinical depression, 3 rehab stays, none of it wrapped in a neat conclusion. The film holds an 8.5 out of 10 on IMDb, and at the end of theater screenings, Russ performed live alongside Stephen Curtis Chapman. His statement from the trailer carries everything he arrived at. Prison doors were meant to be opened. Captives can be set free. I learned the gospel is greater than I could have possibly imagined. Gospel music produced something genuinely beautiful through Russ Taff's career, and it also built the conditions in which a wounded man felt required to keep his wounds invisible. A theology of performance over confession, an industry built on the finished testimony with no space for the person still finding their way through. That is what this story is actually about. Russ Taff found his way through. The cost was higher than it needed to be, and he said so out loud, which took longer than it should have and mattered more than the world that spent decades celebrating him ever seemed to understand.